Amanda, and I am here today to do a tag video. I saw Tabitha on the Kelly Method do this video and I thought it was super interesting, and me being the philosopher that I am, and I really enjoy engaging in conversation with people about things that really matter and that are interesting and important and sometimes controversial. Hence the tag, the controversial parenting tag. I probably will ruffle some feathers in this tag because it is touching on controversial parenting topics. But in doing so, know that I have total respect for different kinds of parenting than the way I do things. I know that there is definitely not one right way to raise a child. And that being said, I hope that this does, generate some interesting conversation with you guys, and I would love to have that conversation in the comments down below. I feel like each of the topics that are on here, I could probably do a separate video just on each of these topics, and I might in the future too. But for now, we'll just do this controversial parenting tag as kind of a get-go. So before we get started, let me say that on all of these things, I'm very much a middle ground type. There are a few things that I sway a little further in one direction than the other, but for a lot of these things, I am very much all about moderation and finding a happy medium and balance. So that being said, let's get started. First of all, pro-life versus pro-choice. Oh boy, is this going to be a touchy issue. I feel like this is not a clear-cut answer. I don't see the world in black and white, and I don't think that this is a black and white issue like many people think it is. Basically, I think that abortion is never something that should be a first choice. I absolutely don't think it should be a method of birth control. If somebody gets themselves into a situation where they are pregnant, it's the responsible thing to do to reap the consequences of your actions and, raise the child. And I definitely think that, there's the whole issue of when does personhood, there's I feel like a lot of the, super conservative side of things says life begins at conception. Well, I feel like the whole thing is kind of fuzzy. I mean, because an egg is alive, a sperm is alive. They're two separate cells, but they're not any more alive than your skin cells or your heart cells or your muscle cells or your liver cells. I mean, they are, they are two separate entities and they are alive. And when they come together, yes, they have the potential to become a person, but a fertilized egg is just that. It's a fertilized egg. I personally don't think it is a person yet. There are all sorts of reasons that fertilized eggs don't survive. I mean, people often will get pregnant without even knowing it, but it's not viable for whatever reason. Your uterine lining isn't healthy enough that cycle, for it to attach. With birth control, an IUD, there are fertilized eggs, but an IUD makes your uterus inhospitable for it and it flushes it out. Even hormonal birth control, part of it, suppresses ovulation, but the backup, the progesterone in it, thins your uterine lining, which prevents it from attaching if you do happen to get a fertilized egg. So it's working from both ends. And I know there are a lot of people who believe that even the loss of a fertilized egg is a loss. However, I feel like it's just so much more complex than that. There's so much gray area on this issue. And as much as people don't like it, I don't think that there is one moment where an embryo suddenly becomes a person. It's a continuum and it's a progression, and I don't think that it's there's any one moment when there is, when it's just a bunch of cells and it suddenly becomes a person. It's an evolution, it's a progression, and that's why it's fuzzy. That's why it's not entirely clear, and that's why it's such a controversial issue. That said, knowing what I know about how quickly an embryo does develop and how quickly differentiation happens, where the cells start turning into like nervous tissue and heart tissue and that kind of thing. It does happen really fast. So I do think that if an abortion must happen, it should happen as early as possible. I mean, you know, as close to missed period as possible, because it is true that, you know, that differentiation starts happening really quick, and it, you know, the personhood probably is starting to happen somewhere in there, although I don't know exactly when I would define that is, because it's a fuzzy gray area. But that said, I feel like there are some circumstances where abortion is the lesser evil. Let's put it that way. You know, in cases of rape, I won't go into all the reasons why I think that in the case of rape, I mean, I think it should be obvious why that is okay. You know, obviously in cases of incest, things like that, it seems pretty clear to me that in those really horrible cases, I think that it is okay to do. The other situation is, you know, you hear these stories of these like meth addict mothers, like they're on their like 5th baby, and they give birth to these addicted babies that they abandon, and that, you know, are left to the foster system. It's so sad, but so many of these kids just end up, you know, with these horrible, horrible lives. And I have to ask, what is more merciful? Is it more merciful to end that life, or is it more merciful to let that life live and have this horrible life? Now, yes, there is adoption, and I think it is fantastic when a good family adopts these kids. But the really unfortunate reality is that so many of these families want to adopt, you know, a healthy child that wasn't born to a drug addicted mother or alcoholic mother or whatever may be the case. And it's so sad, but that's just kind of the reality of it. And, you know, these poor kids grow up with no stability, like no parents, like bouncing around from family to family in the foster system, and they end up really messed up. And like, really, is that like the most merciful thing for that child? I'll leave that question up to you to think about. So I feel like there are some extreme cases like that where I think it's okay, but I definitely think that abortion should not be a go-to. It should definitely be a decision that is made very carefully, because I do think it can be a slippery slope. I definitely think that, you know, like if it's a teenager but they have a supportive family that can help raise the child, or they're willing to give up their baby for adoption, like I really think that that should be the first choice. In the case of finding out if you have a disabled child, that's a really tricky one. I'm not sure if I want to go into that one. I would just say that in that kind of situation, that is really, I would say it's a decision that needs to be made very carefully with prayer. And let's just put it that way. So yeah, I really definitely think this is a touchy issue. Definitely in the vast majority of cases, I think that abortion is wrong. However, there are a few cases like that where I think there are some very valid and ethical exceptions. So I'll just leave it at that. All right, now for a little bit less touchy issue. Whew. Baby wearing. I feel like for me, baby wearing is very utilitarian. I know that a certain part of the attachment parenting community believes that you should be wearing your baby at all times, like your baby should be in contact with you nonstop, you know, for the first several months of life. I am not one of those people. I feel like baby wearing is something that I do, and I really enjoy it. It's really nice, you know, snuggling baby close and you know, carrying them around like when you need your hands for something else. And I do that if I am going outside with my toddler, or you know, we're going someplace where I need my hands, or if I am doing something around the house where I need to use my hands and baby is really fussy, then I will wear baby and do other things at the same time. But I am also not opposed to putting my baby down. You know, I believe in using swings and bouncy seats and that kind of thing to put baby down when you need to do other things. And I think it also helps baby to, you know, not expect to be held all the time, because they're, you know, let's be honest, when you're a mom, like, you definitely need to put baby down to do things sometimes. So that's my take on that. Baby piercing. Honestly, I don't feel that strongly about it. Some people are like, oh, you should let the child make that decision when they're old enough to make their own decision. But like, I know it's part of some cultures to pierce their baby's ears when they're babies. Like, honestly, I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's not something I would do with my kids, but honestly, I don't think it's that big of a thing if it's a cultural thing for you. Breast milk versus formula. The last video I uploaded was actually about breastfeeding. You can check that out. I'll link it down below. This is one that I feel pretty strongly about. I definitely feel that if you are able, you should definitely breastfeed. And I know that, you know, sometimes people really truly do have difficulty with supply. They really tried everything and they just have difficulty with supply. And if that's the case, I feel like there are some good alternative ways you can do formula out there. Like, you can actually make your own homemade formula that's a lot better than commercial formula. And there are organic formulas, things like that out there. However, I really think that there are a lot of ways our culture, especially in like hospital birth, that kind of thing. Now, I know this is making sweeping generalizations here, and some hospitals are very good about helping establish breastfeeding. But there are some very important things that need to happen in order for your milk to come in properly. And there are some hindrances with some hospital practices, like, it's really important to have that skin-to-skin time immediately after birth. You know, if they whisk baby away and give them formula in the NICU, that's going to damage your ability to, you know, have baby suckle on your breast and bring in your milk. You know, there are things like that where I feel like, you know, hospitals could do a lot better at helping women to be successful at breastfeeding, because I do think that the vast majority of women are capable of breastfeeding their child. So, and I really think that it's important, just all of the study, I mean, there's zillions of studies showing why it is so important to breastfeed. There is no formula that is as perfect as your milk. You know, formula doesn't have probiotics in it, doesn't have enzymes. It's not a living food the way your fresh breast milk is. You know, there are ways to get over a lot of the hurdles and the pain and things like that. Or even if you just decide to pump your breast milk, like, that's a totally valid option as well, because baby's still getting your breast milk. And, you know, with Obamacare, like, everybody has access to getting a breast pump for free now. So even if you work, you're still able to afford to pump at work and give baby milk if you can. So definitely a fan of breastfeeding. All right, moving right along, spanking. So I definitely have an opinion about this one that's very much middle ground. I was spanked as a child, and the way my parents did it, I think, is ideal. Like, I think I was spanked a total of 3 or 4 times in my entire childhood. And my parents reserved spanking for the most offensive of offenses. Usually it was either something that was like a really terrible behavior, or if it was something dangerous. And the rest of the time, you know, my parents disciplined me in other ways, but that was like, the spanking was the big guns, and they could use it as a threat, you know, and it was very effective. And I definitely don't feel like I was emotionally damaged as a child. I mean, I feel like I turned out a pretty well-adjusted person, so like, I definitely don't think that it was damaging to me. And that said, I do feel like corporal punishment, it has to be used very carefully. You know, there's a point when it can become abusive. It should not be the very first go-to disciplinary action, and it should never be done in anger as a reaction. It should always be done calmly, intentionally, deliberately, but when it crosses over to when that becomes the only method of discipline that a parent is using all the time, it's it basically becomes abuse at that point. And it loses its meaning for the child, and it's degrading to the child, and it just becomes like a humiliation for the child, and it almost becomes a power trip with the parents. And at that point, yeah, spanking is not so cool, people. But like I said, when it is used very carefully and deliberately and very sparingly, I think it's okay. Because I do generally think that it is true that we should be teaching our kids that it's not okay to hit other people, so we shouldn't be hitting them, obviously. But when it comes to very small children, toddlers, sometimes you can't reason with a 2-year-old. Sometimes just being physical with them is the only way that it like really gets their attention. And so basically, yeah, so this is what I am planning on doing with my kids. I plan on basically doing what my parents did, like using it really sparingly. I have spanked my son one time. He's 2 years old, and I did it because it was a dangerous situation. He fell into a full-blown tantrum in the middle of a street. And so at that point, I gave him a spanking, and I had to, remove him from the situation because it was dangerous. We were in the middle of a street, and he was lying down in the middle of the street. And, he has to learn that, running out in the middle of the street, and especially falling down and screaming in the middle of the street, is dangerous. And so that was the one time I have spanked my son. For the most part, we do discipline in the most loving way possible. I try to stay calm as much as I can, and very much getting down on his level and just looking him in the eye and giving him, that's my mom look. I give that to him, and he takes me seriously most of the time when I give him the mom look. So, using other methods, timeout, removing from situation, distracting. There are so many other loving ways to discipline, and I do use those the vast majority of the time. I think the only other time I might use spanking is if it is a truly abhorrent behavior that the child has done. So anyway, so that's how I feel about that. And I also feel like it's only, I probably would only use spanking up through age 5, maximum age 6, just because at that point you really can, you can really reason with the child. And there are much more effective ways to discipline an older child. But I really think it's mostly effective for very small children, and sparingly, like I said. So that's how I feel about spanking.